What went right for the Detroit Tigers in 2024? We'll talk about that all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Wednesday, hump day, the halfway point in the week here. Hope you're all having a good one. Today, we are going to discuss what went right for the Detroit Tigers in 2024. Now, obviously, quite a lot went right. I'm not sure too many people had playoffs on there. There was some, but I don't think the general consensus was postseason baseball, and certainly not a series win, a series sweep at that at Houston. So a lot went right. And we do this after every season. We do everything that went right for the team this year, everything that went wrong for the team this year. So later, we will have a what went wrong in 2024, because just like every team that's ever existed, there's a handful of things that went right and a handful that went wrong. I also want to be clear that just because someone isn't on the What Went Right show doesn't automatically mean that they quote unquote went wrong, right? Like, some people just meet expectations or are what they are. And the Tigers, to their credit, I will say, actually had quite a few guys that I think fall into that category. So we'll deep dive everybody. That's part of our off-season calendar here, is we're going to do a deep dive on every single player on the roster here coming up. Because most players have good in their game, bad in their game, right? Like Jake Rogers, right, is like a prime example. Is a Gold Glove finalist, was one of the better defensive catchers in baseball, hit 197 and had an OPS barely over 600, right? Like there's good and bad in that profile. So these are the players that I think, or concepts, just anything that it was a part of the organization that I think like undoubtedly went right for the team in 2024. And if you're making a list of all of the things that did quote unquote go right in 2024, you have to start off with Tarik Skubal. I think that more than probably anybody in the entire organization, this guy went right. He had a fully healthy season, which I think was a huge get, right? Like the other reason I like doing this show every year and the What Went Wrong show is just because it reminds everybody of what preseason expectations were for so many players. And I think that Tarik Skubal is a prime example of that. Everybody expected him to be great. Everybody was talking about, dark horse Cy Young, right? Like everybody was kind of on that train, at least in the fan base. But the big question was, can he get a full season? Can this guy start 30 games? He hasn't even come close to a full, healthy, no leash, no like innings limit type of season in his entire career. And we finally got that this season. He's arguably the best pitcher on the planet. I think he's going to win Cy Young unanimously, but even if he doesn't, he's absolutely guaranteed going to win the Cy Young award. He's 27 with 2 more years of team control. Both of those will obviously be arbitration, but just absolutely phenomenal pitcher and one of the biggest pieces this team has going forward. We'll get into all of the Tarik Skubal extension conversations this winter as well. We got a lot to talk about. This team made some waves. There's a lot of discussions to be had, and we will be here every day throughout the offseason to have said discussion. So I think it's important to start off with Tarik Skubal. Let's look at the offensive side of the ball, though. We'll get back to the pitching for sure, because that is probably the positional group that went the most right for this team this year. But it wasn't all doom and gloom as far as position players go, despite the fact that the offense wasn't very high powered. I think everybody knows who I'm going to start with. I want to start with Superman. I want to start with Parker Meadows. Was hitting 100, not like 190, which is not even good, right? Like he was literally hitting 100. Got demoted. Since his return in the second half of the season, he hit 296, had a 340 OBP, a 500 slug. That's an 840 OPS for those who are like me and struggle with math. Those were his numbers in the second half. He was in the 93rd percentile in sprint speed and the 93rd percentile in outs above average range in center field. Also, I think it's important to note that he had a higher average against lefties than righties, which that's a sample size thing to some extent, but his OPS was 732. Like that's not terrible. And I think when he first started, he was kind of unplayable against lefties. He was really, got demoted, was borderline unplayable on both sides, but or against both sides rather. But I think his improvement against lefties really showed there in the last month plus the postseason, right? This guy went from a pure platoon and like defensive replacement to you're going to play every day. And against righties, he hit leadoff, and against lefties, he was hitting 9 when they first were like, okay, we're going to play you every day, though, because you're so valuable. By the postseason, this dude was hitting 6 or 7, a lot of 7-hole in the lineup against lefties still. Continued to just work his way up, improve, had a couple of really nice hits against lefties in the playoffs. It's looking at his development path is so fascinating because he couldn't hit anything at first. Then he started crushing righties. Then he got a little bit of power. When he got called up to Toledo, the big thing that the organization wanted him to improve on was how well he hit lefties. And we were clamoring for this dude to get called up in like June or July of last season of 2023. And he didn't. And the organization kept citing, they want him to strike out less and they want him to hit lefties better. He did that. He made that adjustment, and that is what earned him the call up there in September of 2023. He did that. He started hitting lefties way better at the AAA level. His numbers there improved, and then he cut down the strikeouts. He struck out less. So I think it's really awesome to see that development path continue at the major league level. This dude is already so unbelievably valuable, even if he only plays against righties and is like a defensive sub late in games. If you can get him to be an everyday player, which he was down the stretch, if that's sustainable, and he's even a remotely close to average hitter against lefties, you're talking about a guy that legitimately could be one of the more valuable center fielders in the entire American League. Such a huge win for this organization. In June, we were talking about, well, who's going to play center field going forward? What's the plan at center? And going into the season, we were like, Parker Meadows is far from a guarantee to stick. I don't think there's any question now. I think everybody is not penciling, but penning with ink, writing him in to be the starting center fielder for this team for 160 to 162 games next season. And I think that is a huge win for this organization. Speaking of outfielders, let's talk Riley Greene, okay? We will do that right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can participate this season and get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place all of your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. We'll see what we're talking about tomorrow. We could just do what went wrong for the season on tomorrow's show, but we'll see. There's going to be some news probably rolling out here about like the organization and just, plans in the offseason, more news and notes of that nature. So you could get a show that talks about that, just a bunch of small things that we've learned over the last couple of days, or if there's no big news, we'll just talk about what went wrong for the team this year. But today we're talking about what went right, a positive, uplifting show. Wow, the sun just came out. That's a miracle given the last 72 hours. Riley Greene played 137 games. I think, we can talk about his numbers. We will here in a second. We'll talk about everything that went right for him at the plate. I don't think anything is more important than him just playing almost 140 games. And we still want to see him get to that 150 mark, right? Once you're playing more 150 plus games, you're really okay, this guy's not missing much time. He's pretty much in the lineup every single day. So I think in a perfect world, we get to that. But this was a guy that you have to, again, remember going into the season, a lot of the fan base was like, this dude will never be healthy. It just doesn't matter. He'll never be healthy. It was all doom and gloom about his injury outlook. He still got hurt at one point this year, but the fact that he was almost able to hit that 140 game played mark, he missed, 3 weeks, and that was pretty much it. So was one of, if not your best player, if you're going from opening day to game 162. I think outside of Tarik Skubal, Riley Greene is probably the winner for, most valuable position player on this team. Had a really good season. Still struggled against lefties, which is something we will talk about more when we do our deep dives on all of these players. Hit 213. His OPS was, I think, 697 or 698 against lefties. But because Carpenter missed so much time, Riley Greene really was this team's best hitter for a majority of the season. Hit 294 with an 874 OPS with runners in scoring position, which is a huge ask. That's something that we talked about a lot going into the season and at the end of last season, right? Was Riley Greene is supposed to be this team's best hitter, and him and Torkelson can't hit with wrist. They can't hit with clutch hitting. And so him taking that step forward and being that big time clutch hitter and doing so well in those situations in the middle of the lineup was so important for this team. His baseball savant page is almost all red. And that transition to left field, I want to give him credit for that too. This is a guy that's played a lot of center field in his professional career. And I think that I have always thought and kind of caught heat for it when I first said it on air here 2 years ago now. But I think that this team is at its best with Parker in center and Riley Greene in left, and he had a fantastic defensive season in left field. How he wasn't nominated for a Gold Glove is absurd to me, but he was one of the better, metrically defensive left fielders in the entire sport. So want to give him a ton of credit for that. He was unbelievably valuable. He was one of this team's most valuable players just in terms of WAR, right? How many wins above replacement did you acquire? He was toward the top or at the top, depending on which website you use. So there's still some stuff to improve on. I'm not saying he's a finished product or a perfect player by any stretch. Like I said, we'll talk about that. But just seeing him play a full, healthy season and being in the middle of the lineup and hitting well for almost all of it, I think was a really, really nice thing to see, given kind of the question marks surrounding him going into the year. Want to give credit to Winfield Perez. He was not on anybody's radar going into the season, right? Preseason baseball, we talked about him because he had an okay spring and got moved to the outfield and whatnot. And he was kind of a talking point, but nobody expected him to be as much of a piece as he ended up being. And he wasn't a star this year. He won't be a star, but he provided value and he will be used, legitimately used. He will be a used piece going forward. And I think that is very impressive given kind of what the expectations were laid out for him going into the year. Kerry Carpenter wasn't a negative defender anymore, which I think is a huge talking point here, right? This is a dude that when he first got called up was pretty much unplayable in right field. And we were talking about him just being a pure DH. Well, now he's not a plus defender, but he's not a negative defender. He's pretty much around net zero defense out there, and we will gladly take that. He's got a good arm, too, grades out well in that department. He's incredible versus righties, as we've talked about a lot. His OPS was almost 1,000 against righties by the end of the year. There's still a lot of work to do in the left-handed pitching, department. But he proved this year that he is legitimately one of the best hitters against righties, literally in the entire sport of baseball. And that is incredible to say about a member of the Detroit Tigers. The next step is similar to what we were talking about with Riley Greene, right? Everyone gave Riley Greene a bunch of crap last year for not being able to play a full season. Kerry Carpenter has not come close to a full season yet either. So I think the next step for him is just playing a full year, getting 100% healthy, and hopefully that is something that we can get because everybody is well aware of what that could provide this lineup if he was in there for 162 games. Carson Kelly. How quickly we forget about all of the guys that were traded at the deadline. The Tigers did really well with this trade. I think this is best case scenario. Like, he did really well. He was one of the better offensive catchers in baseball and certainly in the American League and on the trade market. And they ended up trading him. And I think that is a win, right? Like, remember last season, this dude struggled mightily in Arizona, got DFA'd, and did not hit any better when he came to Detroit. So him doing as well as he did and the Tigers being able to flip him for anything is a big win. So that's credit to the front office there. Let's talk pitching, right? We've talked a lot about position players. Obviously, we talked Tarik Skubal because I think he's probably almost certainly the MVP of the team. But this pitching group was so fantastic this year. And Reese Olson, I think, deserves a ton of credit. Again, I know I'm a broken record with this. Let's think back to what people were saying and thinking about Reese Olson in spring training. It's so easy to have recency bias and just be like, oh, yeah, well, like, he did well for all these. And like, we expected him to do that. Yeah, we expected him to do that by the end of the year. Going into spring training, back when pitchers and catchers reported, most people's prediction, myself included, was that Reese Olson was going to start off the year in AAA and Matt Manning and Casey Mize were going to get that fourth and fifth spot in the major league rotation. He made the opening day roster and had a 3.53 ERA. Now, obviously, had some injury stuff in the second half of the year. Honestly, we're getting to a point in the game of baseball, and this can be a much bigger picture conversation at some point, where, like, I'm not even mad at pitchers that get hurt anymore. Like, it's just like a rite of passage almost. Every single pitcher gets hurt at some point and has a very serious, legitimate injury at some point. Thankfully, Reese Olson's was not super serious this year. He missed, a month and a half, 2 months, but was able to come back for the postseason and had a really good first half of the season as a true traditional starter. Has nasty stuff, legitimate chase pitches. There's still some work to do here as well. You could say that about probably pretty much everybody outside of maybe Tarik Skubal, but this was an incredible year, and this was not what was predicted of him at all going into the season. We got to remember how much he just exceeded everybody's expectations. He was phenomenal, and so I want to give him a ton of credit. Jack Flaherty, similar conversation to Carson Kelly, but kind of like on steroids, like even more so. He was incredible and got us two young, controllable pieces that will hopefully help down the road. One really highly regarded prospect. This was a huge win, and he's going to be a free agent again. I know that there's a crowd of Tigers fans that are all aboard the, bring Jack Flaherty back mindset, and it's hard to really blame him. Like, he's legitimately turned into one of the better starting pitchers in baseball again this year after struggling, and he gives a ton of credit to the Tigers, and the Tigers continue to show that they can be a place where pitchers can kind of revitalize their career and come and get a lot better. So Jack Flaherty, a massive success story for this organization this season. And then we get to the bullpen, right? Tyler Holton, legitimately one of the better relievers, more valuable, I should say, relievers in baseball. Had a 2.19 ERA, was going multiple innings a lot, lefties really well against. My preseason expectations of Tyler Holton were almost like borderline embarrassing to look back on. Like, this was a guy that I can remember saying, yeah, like, if he has a 3.5 ERA and can go multiple innings, like, I'd consider that a win, because I don't expect him to be nearly as good as he was in the smaller sample of 2023. I'm just an idiot. Like, this dude is just unbelievable. He's one of the more valuable relievers in the American League, and certainly in the Detroit Tigers organization. And he's going to be a piece that this team values and is very fond of for hopefully a long time. Got a few more relievers to talk about. Then we'll get into some big picture things that went right for the Tigers as well. We will do that right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have so many great features. My favorite one is zone deals, where you choose a section and then Game Time will choose the row and seat for you. And you save a little bit of money that way because you're not technically choosing your exact seat. So it's kind of a way to go to a game and save some money. If you do want to pick your exact seat, they have pictures of every seat in the park so you know where you're sitting before you buy. And obviously your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Also got to talk to y'all about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best in the business, and they are the best place to get real money on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made getting daily fantasy sports accessible to everybody. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long with Prize Picks. Look, there's so many great features. I think my favorite thing with Prize Picks is the injury insurance policy. If a player gets hurt in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. You can join over 10 million users and sign up today. Download the Prize Picks app and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in, as always. So talking about what went right for the Detroit Tigers this season, I think Will Vest is another one. You know, we kind of gave Will Vest a hard time at one point in the middle of the year because of the inherited runners situation. That's still not great. He allowed a boatload, like toward the top in all of baseball, of inherited runners, but his ERA was sub-3. And down the stretch, he was maybe this team's best reliever. So I think that he deserves a ton of credit. His fastball truly turned into a borderline unhittable pitch. He was one of the only relievers that could consistently get swings and misses. Will Vest, absolute massive win of a season. And then obviously you don't talk about Will Vest without talking about Bo Brisky down the stretch as well. Obviously gave up the big home run there that I know kind of stings, but he was so valuable to this team down the stretch. I don't think we get as far as we even did without Bo Brisky. So I don't hold any of that against him. That's the matchup they wanted. He just, beat David Fry, beat him to the spot. He had some struggles mid-season. And also, this is a guy that did not make the team out of camp. He was not on the opening day roster. He lost out to Alex Fido and Joey Wentz. The velocity down the stretch, he was pumping 99, 100. I think this guy legitimately turned himself into a real back-end reliever, and that's something that we've been waiting for him to turn into for like 2 calendar years now. So ton of credit to Bo Brisky as well. Andrew Chafin, similar to Carson Kelly and Jack Flaherty, I don't think he did as well as those two, but he did well enough to get flipped for a prospect. That's a win in my book for somebody that was on a 1-year deal. And then you look at the rest of the bullpen, just so many relievers. Gunther, Herter, Hannafy, you name it. There are so many guys that just really excelled that we did not anticipate to excel this season. And that really just goes back to the pitching as a whole. And I think this is such an easy conversation to have and such an easy point to bring up, but the pitching as a whole is absolutely one of the biggest successes of the 2024 season for the Detroit Tigers. Again, you talk about the individuals like we just did, but even as a group, right? The bullpen's recovery, people should tell tales about it. It should be part of like folklore. We should create jingles about it and write stories and novels. This bullpen was phenomenal in April, then fell off a cliff by the end of May, was brutal for a lot of June and the first half of July. And then from the second half of the season on, recovered and was incredible. Now, some of that is personnel, right? They let go of Joey Wentz. Alex Faedo gets hurt. Shelby Miller gets DFA'd at one point. That was a little bit later in the season, to be fair. But like they replaced them again with these guys, Gunther, Herter, Hannafy, that just came up and were throwing darts. And so I think the biggest thing to take away from the pitching this year is just the confidence that the organization and the fan base has. And you know what? Anybody this organization wants to bring in that's a pitcher, it's not foolproof, right? If it was a guarantee, then, well, that's like impossible, right? We saw Kenta Maeda struggle. We saw Joey Wentz was kind of quote unquote unfixable. But like, I have confidence that anybody they bring in will be given the best chance to turn it around or be a really good pitcher for this organization. And that is such a reassuring thing to have in the back pocket. I also think the outfield as a whole is like, you could argue set. I mean, I know that there's something to be said for having a righty out there, but if you want to include Matt Vierling out there, like that's Matt Vierling, righty outfielder that can play all three outfield positions. Wensil Perez, switch hitter outfielder that can play corner outfield. And then you have Parker Riley and Kerry Carpenter. You know, if you want to add a big power right-handed bat that can play right field, I'm not going to be against that at all. And we can have, again, we're going to have a ton of conversations about what the Tigers need to add, what I want them to add, who I want them to look at, whatever throughout the offseason. But you could not add anything to this outfield next year, and it would still be a pretty darn good outfield. And that's really nice too. Base running. This team graded out for as much frustration as there was on the base paths throughout the year and some question marks surrounding Joey Cora's decision-making. This team was the second most valuable base running team in baseball, according to analytics, right? Baseball Savant has a base running value. Takes a lot of things into consideration, a big, long equation, but the Tigers ranked as the second most valuable, that is the word, base running team in baseball. They're aggressive. They're going to get thrown out sometimes. It's going to be a giveth and taketh away thing, but applying the pressure to the defense to make a perfect throw is the more valuable way to go. And the Tigers did that really well. I want to give credit to the defense. This was not a perfect defensive team by any stretch of the imagination. If you watch the team, you're well aware of that. There's still a lot of holes defensively. There's still a lot of question marks defensively, but it was night and day from last year. Last year, there was a ton of frustrations on a game-to-game basis surrounding this defense. I don't think we had that from game to game this year. There were obviously some plays. You're playing a long season. You're going to have frustrating moments. You're going to have players that struggle defensively. But like as a whole, this team had the sixth best team outs above average in the entire sport. That's really good. Borderline top 5 in terms of range in baseball. And I think that, again, Kerry Carpenter getting better helped that. Parker Meadows just being Parker Meadows helped that. Trey Sweeney down the stretch was a solid defender as well. Colt Keith improved a ton throughout the season. Spencer Torkelson wasn't a complete liability at first like he was last year. There's a lot. And then Riley Greene, we already mentioned earlier. Jake Rogers, Gold Glove finalist. Like this was a much better defensive unit than it was a year ago. And I think that that's important to list off as well. AJ Hinch, not too much else to add here. We've talked a lot about this. You could really say the coaching staff as a whole. Still think there's some questions about the faith and trust in the hitting coaching staff, but the pitching coaching staff is amongst the best in baseball, and AJ Hinch proved in the second half of the year that he is among the elite of the elite in the dugout and is one of the best managers that this sport has to offer. I also want to give credit to Ryan Garko, who is the head of player development in the front office, because I think that that's another win. If we want to zoom out even more and talk really big picture, that player development was a huge win this year. You saw Tigers prospect rankings fly up the board. So many pitchers that were no names that now are, like Ham. Ham is somebody that I love and a lot of people are really high on. He was a guy that a year and a half ago wasn't on too many people's radar. And then on top of that, you get into the development of a lot of these hitting prospects at the lower levels of the minors, McGonigal, Clark, etc. I think, and like Briseño, right? Like there's honestly, there's so many that are development stories, not high draft picks, right? Like Clark or anything, right? That are legitimately, you know what, they got developed in the Tigers organization, and that is the reason that they are taking steps forward. I think that that's a big win, and that's a far cry from where this organization was. We can go way more in depth on that at some point in the offseason. We'll do pretty soon here in the next few weeks. We'll do a complete like Tigers minor league kind of recap of the year, who the biggest, prospect rankings and who the biggest risers and fallers were and whatnot. But I think player development was really, really solid. There's still a ways to go. I'm not saying you're the Dodgers or the Rays or anything yet, but this was a huge step in the right direction. Obviously, the team after August 10th, that kind of goes without saying. This team was the best team in baseball from August 10th until the end of the season. I think that, a lot of that had to do with AJ Hinch and the pitching chaos thing. But I think that a lot of reasons we just mentioned, a lot of players that I just mentioned as well, deserve a lot of credit for that run too. And that brings us to the end here, which is just the season as a whole. Right? It's easy to get lost in that big picture kind of did the season go right or wrong for the Tigers? It was a heartbreaking ending. It was a frustrating ending. They should still be playing baseball right now, given where they were through 3.5 games. But this was still a successful season. This was a huge step in the right direction. This was playoff baseball for the first time in a decade. This was AJ Hinch kind of reminding people that he is really good at his job. I think there was some people that kind of lost faith in him in 2022 and 2023. And so a lot of reasons I just mentioned, right? The coaching staff, the pitching, like all of these things lead to answering the question, was this season a success? And I think it without a doubt was. Is it the final goal? No. I'm very competitive. I have a hard time saying that anything is like an overwhelming success without lifting the commissioner's trophy. But like, I think given where this team has been at and where it was going into the season, without a question, most people's mind, this was a successful year. And you have, I think the biggest reason I say that is because when we have these conversations about what to expect from the Tigers going into 2025, the biggest talking point for the first time since I took over this show 3.5 years ago is going to be who we can add to the people we're keeping, rather than, I can remember, was it 2022 that I did this, or was it just last year? Maybe it was both. I can remember one offseason where we literally had an entire 2-week stretch where we were just saying, putting percent chances of returning next to every player's name. Like, it was just like, there's going to be a ton of roster turnover. We got to play this game where we're like, oh, like, what are the odds that this person's on the team next year? And Scott Harris came in and within the first 24 months overturned over half of the 40-man roster from when he started. This is the first year where that's not going to be the case, right? Like, he's not going to have to go in and completely overturn the roster top to bottom. There's still a lot of moves that are going to have to be made. You're still talking double digits, but there are actually pieces on this team that we can confidently, right? If you're a longtime listener, you remember the year of the audition, that was 2023. There are people that have passed their audition. There's a legitimate core, a legitimate group of players that you can point to and go, this team can be a playoff team with those players if the players that are added externally around that core are good. This can actually be a winning team. And I don't think we've been able to say that with confidence yet in this rebuild. And that's awesome. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow. Again, we might talk just what went wrong, have that episode. There's still plenty to talk about there. But we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if any news comes out over the next 24 hours as well. Either way, we'll be back in your eyes and ears tomorrow. I appreciate you all for tuning in over the offseason. Sorry for a little bit of a longer show today. We'll get back hopefully to around 30 minutes tomorrow. I'll see you then. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. Go Tigers, baby.